Okay, hello everybody. So I've been getting a couple of requests on this. Some people expressed that they might like it. So I am going to do a deck builder video on the RebsFRAGO mod because I've been getting some people that come to me and they're like, "Oh, I don't know what I'm in the deck. I'm so confused." And part of it basically just comes down to either not knowing the game or not knowing the mod. And some people don't know both because some people get the game to play the mod. So we'll go over some stuff, and I'll be talking about some of the game mechanics, which might be redundant for the veteran WARNO players, but I'll also be talking about some of the mod features and things to look out for, considerations when making a deck. I generally almost always play skirmish. This mod is pretty much built for skirmish. If you play destruction and you enjoy destruction, that's great. That's awesome. You got considerations for me about that? Let me know. But the stuff that I'm going to tell you today is primarily going to be concerned about skirmish games, particularly multiplayer skirmish games. So yeah, let's check it out. So make sure you got the mod installed. So go to the mod center, enable it, hit apply. The game will restart and your mod will be installed. So we'll go to the armory here. We'll check out all the decks. Since the recent, which one was it? Freaking land jut update, we ran out of room up here at the top to display all the divisions. I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, Eugen will make the system a little bit better. They only updated it to be like this like 8 months ago or a year ago. So I hope they end up revising it again so that I can add in tons of modded divisions like I have here. This mod has I think about 20 or 30 new divisions. So there's a bunch of decks that I already have made up. Now, when you start the mod, you're not going to have any decks. In order to play skirmish, you got to make decks. I don't have pre-made decks built. You got to make your own decks. And the reason is for that is balancing this mod is freaking massive and takes a lot of work. Building and maintaining these decks takes a lot of work. I'm constantly having to go back over and change their veterancy and change their numbers and move around assets. Typically, changing like strategic assets like MLRS and seed aircraft and stuff because that's kind of something that's most open to interpretation. That's really some of the biggest players on the battlefield. So decks undergo a lot of changes a lot of the time, and it's just hard to keep up and maintain pre-made decks because I had to go in and basically do the exact same thing for pre-made decks, but it's a totally different structure. Very annoying, very hard to do, especially with this volume and scale. I believe this is the only mod for WARNO that actually has every single unit and weapon modified, and of course every single deck modified. So please look here, we got 3,338 units. This is with all the DLC. Something like 300, nearly 400 of those units now are custom units introduced by the mod. Please appreciate that the sheer volume of work that's had to be done. I'm actually having to use AI for a lot of these mass edits and dumb monkey work that Eugen puts me through when they do an update. I would just go in and mass edit things with the AI. But all these values you see, like the ranges, the accuracy, the reload rates, the supply cost, I'll explain supply cost here in a minute. That's all been hand done by me, hand done and hand calculated. So like you see, like this missile's got a HE value of 4.97. That's based off of a curve, a calculation I created that's based off of the real explosive content of the actual missile. And that's to give it some consistency with some interpretation, of course, but consistency with other projectiles like this one here or the cubes. You know, you see the cubes got 11 damage of 11. That's a big freaking bang. So yeah, everything's been changed. Optics values have been changed, concealment's been changed, speed especially has been changed. Not only the numbers you see on the screen have been changed, but the numbers behind the game have been changed. So the core mechanics, obviously, they're hard-coded. I can't do anything about them, but they are the same. However, I have changed the numbers in those core mechanics and the way they're calculated. Damage drop off over distance with AoE weapons, area of effect weapons, so explosives, that's a big change that I've made. Suppression. Suppression is also another huge change that I've made. Infantry get their own suppression and they react to suppression different. It's more like Steel Division 1 suppression. It's not like they don't get the same suppression modifiers that vehicles do anymore, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I guess we'll get into it. I feel like I'm forgetting saying something. I probably am forgetting to say something, but we will get into it here. So I believe, if I remember correctly, 8th is one of the, for NATO, 8th is one of the 8th Infantry. It's one of the divisions that NATO gets without needing a DLC, so I will probably do it. I like this division a lot. It's not fancy, but has everything you need in it to win, and it makes a pretty great beginner division for that reason. It's in general very flexible. So some of these decks, I should go back here for a second. Some of these decks they range in utility and flexibility. You know, I hear people. I've had a few, not a lot, but a few come to me and they're like, "Oh, some of these decks are just unbalanced or too OP or too shit." Typically, they'll say it's too shit. It's like, well, if you're playing the American Special Forces deck against a motor shooting division, you're probably going to get your ass beat because this is inherently a support deck. They're good at one or two things. In a 1v1 or 2v2, they're going to be more a liability than an asset. Now, you put these guys in with a 4v4, where you've got air dominance players for them to work with, you're going to see it's going to be a lot more exponential of an effect. Same thing with like 4th Allied Tactical Air Force or Special Packed one. We got a couple of Special Packed ones that are similar. Like here's the packed version of that. Amsdon, Spetsnaz, the Machine Gun Artillery Division. This is basically all freaking static weapons. Obviously, you're probably not going to go into 1v1s and come out on top of these. If you do, kudos to you. The other guy sucks. But yeah, like some decks are much more flexible than others. For example, 85th Motor Stroke. This is a Soviet paper division. They're basically a reservist unit that have been brought up to fuller strength. This is kind of modeling after. This is one of the mod's custom divisions, and it's kind of modeling the war's gone on for several months, maybe a year, and you know you've got new equipment being thrown in along with conscripts and stuff. There's a similar NATO. I've got a similar NATO division for America, the 34th. They're very similar, but they have a lot of assets: seed, long-range radar batteries, artillery, everything you need to win a match. But it's all freaking reservists. Well, yeah, it's different decks. You're going to have different utilities, the way you do things. I advise as a new player to start with something that's high flexibility. You're not that high speed. You are not that knowledgeable and smart. You're not going to do well with a Special Forces deck right off the rip. Get to know the game, get to know the mod, play reservists or a line infantry deck, something that's flexible. So let's check out 8th here for a second. So we got Logistics tab, infantry, artillery, tanks, recon, anti-air, helos, and the fixed wing air tab. Now, something to notice about this, you know, in vanilla, it's obviously the same. Everything's got a limited number of cards, which is this number here. That number is 2. There's 2 cards. There's 10 units in a card, and then you have a limited number of activation slots. In each of these activation slots in the mod, they cost 1 point. In vanilla, it kind of scales up. It'll be like 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 3 point, 4 point, blah, blah, blah. In the mod, all these activation slots cost the same, and all decks get the same number of activation points. So for every deck in the mod, there are 48 total activation slots, but 32 total activation points. Also, as a general rule of thumb, with the exception of some extremely specialized units that I don't want people to spam, like the false flag guys, you'll see them in a minute. they got some new abilities, but with the exception, like I think the false flag guys might be it actually. Every card in the mod has you can get 2 of each. but you're limited to 2 of each. And I do that to try to force players to diversify their assets, and also on the flip side, it's just easier for me to balance. I try to make all the cards equally valuable. So, 6 105 millimeter M102 howitzers is roughly equivalent in utility to a M198 or M198 155 millimeters. So yeah, we'll start with. So in the game, you got to have supply. I think I'll just go over it very briefly. Supply is you got to have it for fuel and ammo. Fuel is limited, however, the mod has more realistic fuel consumption rates, so your units are unlikely to run out of fuel. However, fuel consumption still is a factor. It still consumes supply. Ammunition consumes supply, and repairing or replenishing troops consumes supply. You have to have it to win games, especially in this mod. I see in vanilla a lot of people go without supply depots, but you got to have it in the mod because the games are generally much longer, at least 30 minutes, if not an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours. My target was probably about 90 minutes. I don't like sitting in a lobby for 40 freaking minutes waiting for 6 to 8 players to join just to have a 20-minute game. So the mod is slower, the games are longer, you expend more ammunition. That's another thing about the mod. You're generally shooting a lot more to make a kill. It's more realistic. Not everything is modeled like a guided missile, like in vanilla. So you really need supply. Now, however, on some of these weapons, you don't see supply costs. And this is basically just a UIism. Every weapon still has a supply cost. When the amount of the supply is lower than 1 for the entire length of the salvo, so obviously things like these 5.56 rifles. You'll also see it on some like smaller guns, like 30 millimeters and stuff like that. I think there's like 76 millimeters are like that too. They're like 0.9 kilograms in real life, so their supply values typically aren't shown. And in the game, it'll tell you like 4 is 4 kilograms. However, in the mod, 4 the supply value of 4 is modeled at 40 kilograms, not 4. So I had to do it like that just because of UI restrictions, because of game restrictions. There's maximum supply values that I can't use for the weapons in the mod. I cannot upload in the mod with too high a supply value. So I had to move everything down in order to make room for the big assets. So in short, all weapons have supply consumption rates, or should have supply consumption rates that are equivalent to the actual weight, actual munition being used. And this creates an effect where supply is, you require less supply for things like infantry and machine guns and infantry anti-tank weapons and tow missiles, but you require a lot more supply for things like heavy anti-air systems and artillery. Plane supply works the same way. However, obviously, planes are off-map units, and their supply cost is essentially just a reload time. That's basically what it comes down to. The displayed reload time is the time in between shots. The supply cost for a plane is essentially its reload time while it's in its quote-unquote hangar when it's not deployed. So planes is kind of a big consideration to look at that supply, and that's actually why I've got a lot of bombers. Yeah, I don't have multiple bomber options. Actually, I think I do. Yeah, cluster, napalm, HE. That's why they're all weighed the same. You see, like this cluster bomber only has 2 bombs. This one has 6. Well, this one drops all 6 when it drops. This one drops all 2 when it drops. Look at the supply value. It costs though. You're going to be able to cycle this plane 3 times faster. Around 3 times faster, probably twice as fast if you count for damage and stuff. So you're going to be hitting more targets with this plane than you're going to be hitting with this plane, unless you're dropping on clusters of enemy units. If you're up against a competitive player that spaces out their units and uses common sense, it's not likely that you're going to get more hits and more kills with this plane as opposed to this plane. Just FYI. Doesn't mean this plane's useless either. 6 Mark 82 is nothing to snuff at, but different purposes and different utilities. Anyway, going back to logistics. So I like to have, obviously, my field supply point. I actually can get 2 of these, but you generally only need 1. This should last you an hour to a 90-minute game, assuming you have a reasonable ammo consumption rate. And I'll show you how to keep your ammo consumption rate reasonable here. So I'll go with that, and typically I'll have at least 2, if not 3, supply vehicle cards. Same rules apply to supply vehicles. The amount of supply they carry is relative to how much they can carry internally in real life. So in real life, the M548A2 can carry 5,400 kilograms of supply. So that's 540 in the mod. Same thing with the M35. Same thing with the HEMT or HEMT. However, I was a Marine, okay? We didn't fucking have these things. But anyway, so I typically like to get a big supply vehicle. You might notice if you do the math, you have to understand things like per capita to do this math, but if you do the math, you'll get more supply with this card for less cost. 65 versus 998 as opposed to 25 and 230. So, but you get more units in this card. So I like to have different supply units for different things. I'll have these guys for more like frontline units, or closer to the front. And I'll have these guys for the big stuff, like the big artillery, the big rocket batteries in particular, and the big anti-air batteries. Hell, I don't think a M35 can even fill up an IHawk in one go. It makes sense, right? Are you really going to be carrying 3 IHawk missiles back there? Maybe. The Marines can make it work. But anyway. And I've been liking to lately, I've got these units. They're vanilla units, and in vanilla they're just command units, but in the mod they got this COC trait, and this is a radius that basically buffs all the units around them. It's sort of like the regular commander buff that vanilla has, but it applies to other abilities and it stacks on top of veterancy. So this is nice to have deployed near the front line. It's a fairly large radius. It's a couple of kilometers. So I like to have these. I'll use them to cap objectives if I screen them with troops, but I like having that bonus, and I've noticed a lot of other veteran players of the mod using it. But this will augment your troops' ability to see, aim time, I think accuracy a little bit. I can't remember. But it's stuff related to like pathfinding, reconnaissance, and stuff. That's basically modeling like higher levels of organization and battlefield organization and communication. So we'll go to the infantry tab here. Sometimes I'll shuttle back and forth. I'll get a couple of infantry units and then come back and see what else I can do. But I generally always like to have a tow team of some kind. I'm going to go with the ITOW. The ITOW can crack just about anything, and it's got 4 in the card as opposed to 2. Dragon guys, I do like to have them. You get a couple less in the card, but I do like to have them. The ATGMs are pretty godly in this mod, and I've been doing my darndest to actually try to mitigate their overpoweredness on the battlefield without actually cutting into their realistic capability. So ATGMs generally, they don't have as much of a proliferation as some of the other anti-tank weapons in the mod, which is realistic. I mean, like an ATGM, like a crew serve tow team, I mean, this is like a company level asset right here. So anyway, so we'll probably get these Dragon guys. I don't know if I want to be too redundant with the M113s. Some people got different philosophies of transports and such. The M35, obviously, it moves faster and you can sell it, but the M113 is a proper fighting unit. It's not a great fighting unit, but it can still do some work. The 50 cal, the mod can engage light armored vehicles, and the M47, you might be able to get away with sniping some tanks with it. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. I think for these guys, my philosophy is if I got a good AT weapon with the infantry, I generally go with a cheaper transport that doesn't need one or doesn't have a high-tier one. And then for my guys, like my AT4 guys, I'll bring one that does have a proper anti-tank weapon. I know good players that play the mod that do the opposite. They like to put all their AT assets or AT transports with their AT infantry and so on and so forth. You know, it's down to you and what you want. Engineers in the mod, they're very good at destroying infantry at close range. Your highest DPS infantry destroying weapons that infantry carry are going to be your satchel charges. However, they are the shortest range and they're extremely difficult to get close to the enemy with, especially with the suppression of the mod. You got to think, if you're crossing a field and you get shot at, your unit's now going to stall and stop in the field and take casualties. So you got to have suppression. These engineers aren't bad because they carry a machine gun, so they can do a little bit of their own suppressing, but they're not going to overwhelm, like, say, a fortified enemy machine gun squad that's in a building or something. They're going to need fire support. My philosophy is, if I've already got that fire support, then I can pretty much do the same fire maneuver, close with, and destroy the enemy with your regular infantry squads. It takes a little bit longer, but the same effect is achieved. So I don't always take engineers. However, engineers are very potent, and people do like to use them quite a bit. So it really depends. Again, it depends on your strategy and what you prefer to do. I prefer a high flexibility approach, so I tend to put a little bit less into my infantry diversity and more into my bigger strategic assets. And I'll show you a little bit of that in a minute. So I'm gonna grab, I grab those AT4 guys, and we'll probably get, I like to always get a leader infantry of some kind. We'll put him in a truck so he can move fast. That way I can get to, I mean, he's going to be behind all my troops, so I don't need him in an armored unit. Gunners are pretty good. They got 3 machine guns, but again, they kind of same philosophy for me with the engineers. I prefer to use bigger supports than just machine guns. However, these are absolutely gnarly to run into, and they're going to have some of the best suppression. I do need to explain suppression here in a minute. I'll probably do that when I get to artillery. Support. So this is something I do always take, are these support weapons, because they're super cheap for the amount of suppression and damage that they deal. I love taking these. I especially love to slap them with my tow missiles and stuff and just set them up over a field, really motion people down. 19s and the AGS-17s, the automatic grenade launchers, they have just like the 50 cals and stuff, they also have a armor piercing capability. So they're very flexible. Really the trade-off between a Mark 19 and 50 cal. Mark 19's got better range, but obviously it's a much lower rate of fire and essentially much less of a suppression effect, an aggregate suppression effect. The suppression is more dependent on the AOE of the munition as opposed to its rate of fire. But if you were to calculate it by like suppression damage per second or whatever, the M2HB would beat the Mark 19. Same thing with the M60. The M60 would beat the 50 cal in suppression, but obviously the 50 cal is superior at range and accuracy. But generally, I'd go with the 50 cal or the 40 mil. The 7.62's kind of done it with the machine guns. I already have my infantry squads. I'm probably going to leave the infantry tab like this until I fill everything else out. So the next thing is artillery, and I'm glad they have it next because it is really important for most decks. This is where I probably should get into actually explaining suppression in the mod. So I mentioned that there are different suppression modifiers that cause different negative effects for infantry and such, crew-served weapons. Infantry actually get pinned down, they slow down, and it gets to a point they're fully suppressed, they cannot shoot back. Suppression is very deadly, especially if it is exploited. You know, there's a saying in the infantry and the military, fire without maneuver is a waste of ammo, and maneuver without fire, suicide. But that's basically what that's about. You have to use suppression. You have to exploit suppression. Otherwise, you're basically just wasting ammo. Your ability to destroy the enemy is almost always. I mean, you got to think this is 19. The game is based on 1989. The mod takes some units up to 1994. So I think they got like the star streak in the game, which was actually introduced in 97. But all the weapons in the game are pretty much dumb munitions. Most of them, there are very few guided munitions in the game. If they are guided, they're essentially laser guided quotation marks. There's no inertially guided GPS munitions like we have today. Destruction back then was particularly dependent on closing with the enemy and shooting them in the face. Still is now in today's warfare. but especially so back then. So you have to suppress the enemy, you have to close with them, and you have to destroy them if you're going to have significant effects. So artillery, I should say, suppression is scaled in the mod by damage. It's curved. I have a calculation. All these numbers are freaking calculated. So that's why they look funny. That's why there's a bunch of weird decimal numbers everywhere. I freaking calculated everything. So if you look at the artillery, you're going to notice a trend. Like, this is a Bunker Buster 203 millimeter. It's got a little bit less. Yeah, it's got a little bit less range. Oh no, that's an ER. My bad. They both have reduced side charges. So it's fucking. Pardon my language. I was surprised for a minute there. I thought I was comparing it to the regular one. Both of these have reduced size charges because this one's a Bunker Buster and this one's an extended range of the base bleed shell or something like that. But you'll notice a trend with artillery. Like, here's a 203 millimeter with 9 damage. That's a lot. That's a decent amount of damage. I mean, that's if you drop it on a tank, it's pretty much going to one-hit kill it. The 109's got 6. That's a 155 millimeter. 105's got 3.9. 107 millimeter mortar is 4.47. The mortars caliber obviously works different from mortars. These are lower velocity, thinner walled shells. They're going to have more explosive content. And then you get to the 81 millimeters, which are the lightest mortars in the game. And they got 2.19 damage. You'll notice a trend. Obviously, the 81 millimeter mortar does less suppression damage than the 203 millimeter, but compare the amount of suppression to the regular damage. So you got 273 for that. Go back down to the 81. It's 118 for 2 damage. So that's nearly a 5 times suppression difference between the 203 millimeter howitzer. So the 81 millimeter mortar, obviously, there's other factors that count too, like area effect radius. I did base suppression damage off of the damage radius. So the radius of the suppression is 5 times the size. The general rule of thumb, it's 5 times the size the total area effect radius. And the area effect radius is actually fairly large. It's just curved up very high. So you generally have to drop around right on the target to get destruction effects. However, that suppression radius is very large. And the bigger the boom, the larger that suppression radius as well. So yes, it is true that the 203 millimeter is going to have a larger suppression radius and it's going to have better suppression over range. But if you actually could calculate it all out between the radius, the rate of fire, and suppression value, you're going to find that the smaller caliber stuff, and this is the same goes for every weapon in the mod. Every weapon works like this. You see the same with the machine guns and small arms. Machine guns and small arms actually have the highest, because they're some of the lowest damage weapons in the game. They actually have some of the highest suppression efficiency. So that's a trend with everything. It's a universal. I mean, I'm a really big nerd for like consistency and stuff. I don't just pull numbers out of my ass. You know, this is how I balance stuff and try to make things as realistic as possible. Especially when you're dealing with stuff like this, which is arbitrary. Like, there's no suppression, obviously, isn't quantifiable in real life. But anyway, so that gives us a consideration for artillery. Another consideration is range and accuracy. Unlike vanilla, artillery is more consistent in this mod. If you see a range, it's going to give you an idea of what the accuracy is, because every artillery piece will have the same accuracy at that range. I think the only exceptions are the rocket artillery. The rocket artillery have like a 50% wider radius or 100% wider radius than the tubed artillery. And that's simply just because doctrinally they're used differently. You know, when you have an MLRS like a BM-21 Grad, which stated range is at 20 kilometers, that's in real life, that's like something like a 400 meter area effect radius. Got that right. Obviously, you would not be using a howitzer the same way at the same distance. You might take a howitzer with that kind of a CEP, and you'd use it like 10 kilometers, not 20. Anyway, so we got realistic ranges on stuff. We have consistent accuracies. The longer range, the more accuracy is a general rule of thumb for everything. So we can assume that by looking at the 105, it's going to have probably about 25% less accuracy than, say, the 155, give or take, and so on and so forth. The longest range weapon we got here, it would it'd be the MLRS. So these MLRS, they're going to have a little bit less accuracy than the 203 millimeter, but you also got to think this is a rocket system. They're going to be popping off a lot of really big bangs fairly quickly. For the M270, I believe it's a 3.3 second delay in between each rocket that I've got. So this deck is really big on artillery, as you can see. You can tell because we've got both the 203 and MLRS. So we're going to work with that. We'll use our extended. We'll probably grab an extended range 203 millimeter MLRS. Also look to get, we have some cluster artillery, which is very nice. Now cluster artillery, it's got less, compared to HE in the mod, it's got less of an area of an effect. I know in real life cluster actually spreads out more than HE, but it's to make it kind of fit the animation. Cluster is unfortunately I can't change the scaling, so the damage drop off every distance. So if I give cluster the same area of effect radius as HE, which is very large because it counts for like the tiniest shrapnel going hundreds of yards, then what you'll get is like tanks getting insta-deaded hundreds of meters from the impact point. So effectively speaking, cluster in the mod is actually got a reduced area of effect versus HE, but on the flip side, it's got a more intense effect. As you can see, cluster right here, that's the munition type. It has a much higher chance of rolling a critical hit. It also does penetration damage to the top of a vehicle, so that top armor value that a vehicle has, it'll do damage to. So it can penetrate that vehicle, has a higher chance for rolling a critical hit. Another big consideration about critical hits in the mod is that critical hits can kill. Vanilla, critical hits sort of like, it gives it a debuff. The track's busted, tank turret stuck, or whatever. In this mod, it can do that, but it can also kill. And this applies to infantry as well. Infantry can be instant killed by criticals. It's rare, but it can happen. I don't mean the whole squad, but like individual men, But yeah, vehicles can be instant killed by anything in the game. Infantry can lose individual soldiers to anything in the game. Therein lies essentially the viability of cluster. Another consideration to make, I keep thinking, sorry, I'm very disorganized with this. I should honestly have like a pile of notes, but there's a lot to this freaking mod. Another consideration to make is suppression itself is modified by the resistance of the target. That's resistance is a game term. So let's say if I'm shooting at a tank with HE, this is a mod thing. This is not a vanilla thing. This is a mod thing. If I'm shooting at a tank with HE, it's going to have much, even though it does the same amount of suppression right here, the tank is going to receive much less suppression from the HE than it would from cluster. So the more penetration it gets to an armored vehicle, the more likely it's going to suppress that armored vehicle. It's going to be more of a threat. High armor stuff is just going to shrug off HE. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. You got HE, which is better it's your best multi-purpose option. It's good at destroying vehicles. It's good at destroying infantry. It can pound down buildings, although it takes quite a few hits. The mod's got much stronger buildings than vanilla. You can pound down buildings and pound infantry out of tree lines and such with some work. A cluster, you have much reduced effects you have reduced area of effect, which already kind of makes it less viable for infantry. It still does more damage to infantry than vanilla. Don't get me wrong. This thing can absolutely wipe infantry squads, particularly if they're in the open. But it has reduced damage against infantry in woods and especially infantry in buildings. I mean, infantry in buildings basically shrug this off. These are a bunch of tiny little submunitions. If they're in anything like a Khrushchevka freaking apartment building, they're just going to shrug it off. So I like to have a little bit of both. I like to have HE, I like to have my HE, and I like to have my cluster. So since this is the only cluster option in the deck, I'm probably going to take this cluster artillery. I will probably also take this M109 just so we have some mobile HE. And I will go with the 105 and probably one mortar unit of some kind. I don't use a whole lot of mortars. It's not that they're not effective. They're actually some of the most effective artillery units. As long as you're not getting counter battered, you might as well just spam mortars. My only issue with them is that they're short range, and because of that, they're kind of hard to keep resupplied because they got to be so close to the front, as well as micro because you got to have like shitloads of them. I like to have my mortars. I'll show you probably in another video or later in this video. I like to have my mortars where they're firing on frontline enemy units, so I'm always having to change their fire defense position. Defense fire, I think that's what the game calls it. So that they're always engaging frontline units. I don't want them shooting backline units because they're just going to waste ammo on suppressing things that don't really need to be suppressed. So, but I do like to have mortars, and they're very good for both suppression as well as putting up smoke screens. And sometimes, especially in multiplayer, you really do need smoke screens. Because I'm one of these nerds that only plays at like 7 orders a minute, I'm probably going to go with the bigger mortar. So that will facilitate my very slow gameplay. Let me see here. I will probably update some of these. When you got this much artillery, this is quite a bit of artillery, it's behoove of me to update it because I'm going to run into the issue where I'm going to have more supply trucks, or I'm going to have more ammo consumption than my supply trucks could keep up with. So at that point, I might as well just update my artillery. And updating any unit can be very important. In the mod, I've changed all veterancy modifiers. Here you can actually see it take effect. The higher I make it, the rate of fire goes up, the aim time gets shorter, and the accuracy it doesn't show you here because mortars don't use a RNG accuracy. They just have a beaten zone. But the accuracy does go up. There is a bunch of things with veterancy that these unit cards don't show you, like cover. What is it? The beaten zone. What is it? The beaten zone, the spread of the shot, suppression, receive suppression, stuff like that. So with these, I will probably definitely upvet them. I'm feeling a little bit risky. I'll probably max upvet these mortars. I actually don't use a whole lot of mortars. They don't tend to get killed a whole lot because I generally have this counter battery screen working. So I'll probably do that. I'll upvet my howitzers, my intermediate howitzers probably once each, and I'll leave the big stuff unvetted. They're more effective when they are vetted, but I like to have a little bit of redundancy too. One MLRS unit might be a little bit risky for me. I've gone whole games without losing MLRS. It's not common to lose them, but if you lose your MLRS, it's like losing the queen piece to your deck. So I'll probably keep it like this. This will be my arty lineup. But notice how I've got a little bit of everything. I've got my mortar for suppressing frontline infantry units and deploying smoke. I got my 105s for absorbing enemy fire and doing frontline suppression. These guys kind of do a little bit of everything. I consider it better to have a unit of 105s and a unit of 155s as opposed to 2 units of 155s or 2 units of 105s, because you still get the counter battery capability that the intermediate caliber artillery gives you, but you still have the higher suppression output that the 105 gives you. It basically gives you more flexibility to shift weight and put it where you need it. You know, if you're up against an infantry that's not if you're up against an enemy that's not giving you a high counter battery threat, then I can shift weight into these 105s and really get them working. And they're honestly going to be better for my infantry assaults, for supporting my assaults, than the 155s will be. So I got the 155s basically serve the same purpose. One is self-propelled, the other is crew served. Crew serves, they're kind of hard to destroy in a way because I treat them like infantry. They've got a shitload of hit points. They enjoy entrenchment modifiers like infantry when they're stationary for a certain amount of time. You can put them in tree lines and such, and they get cover from that. So these guys can be very hard to destroy in terms of raw hit points. But on the flip side, they're slow. You can't move them. Like, look, it's got a speed of 1 kilometer. That's like the lowest I could set it. If you're going to move these guys, you got to do it with a truck, pretty much. On the flip side, you got the M109, which can pick up and move after it fires, but if it gets tapped by a cluster, you're fucked. So, you know, pick your poison. Of course, I got the big counter battery supports. These guys are for winning the war on a strategic level. I'm not going to be using the MLRS, and I'm rarely going to be using the 203 for frontline targets. These guys are going to get used on deep stuff, high priority targets. Enemy radar batteries, EW systems, and probably most importantly, enemy artillery, particularly their big artillery. I'm going to try to identify and locate their biggest artillery first, and engage that with these, because I want that gun. So these are really going to be, these two units here is really what makes a deck an already superiority deck. Most decks, not all decks, should get these kinds of assets. That's the arty tab. Let's go to tanks. Tanks is pretty basic, but it is good. We've got the Abrams and we've got the M60. Don't scoff at the M60. It's a shit tank. It's a cheap tank, and it's a shit tank. But therein lies its viability. I mean, you look at the stats. I mean, the Abrams just absolutely. One Abrams can just trash like 20 fucking M60s, like no problem. But the M60, it's a gun. It's an armor with a gun. This thing can destroy infantry almost as well as the Abrams can. So I like to always have both an expensive tank and a cheap tank. At least one card of each. I'm not a huge tank player. For a long time, tanks have been abused in this mod because of the air and ATGM superiority. And it's hard with the constant grind of the fighting, it's hard to organize a coherent armored assault. However, I've been doing some things like with suppression and such, these suppression resistance modifiers and such, that have really given tanks a new life on the battlefield. They've been pretty competitive platforms, but you still have to play them intelligently, and they still require a lot of micro. So that's really, the micro is honestly what kind of disincentivizes me from playing too much. Also, it kind of comes as my role as a support player. Obviously, as maker of the mod, I know it. I know this mod a little bit better than most people. So I tend to play support. That way people can play what they want without getting their booties absolutely mauled. So I don't really put a whole lot in the tanks. I might actually take a tank command unit. Not everybody does that. Some of my good players don't take tank command units. I just like to have it because you can just put them on an objective and they can just sit there and be a menace a little bit. It's not like a command infantry unit which walks into the objective and randomly gets tapped by a 240mm mortar. So we'll probably get one of these M109s. I'll probably get the A3 with the TOW2 just because I don't have any other. I didn't get TOW2s here, so I'll probably get it here. This, really the benefit to this over the Cruiser is that it's going to be, where is it? That comes with a larger card size, and obviously it's more mobile. But really I'm going to get a lot more work out of the Cruiser. But yeah. So we'll probably leave that as that. I might revisit it, but we'll see what else I got to spend points on. The recon, not very wide and flexible with this deck. We do have a recon rocket plane, which I'll probably take. I like that a lot. The Fist V, which is both a SIGINT unit and essentially a GSR unit. Probably going to reorganize it where the vehicle GSR units actually get the GSR icon. As of right now, it's just modeled with the highest optics value, which is very nice to have. Infantry scouts, gotta have these, especially as an artillery heavy deck. Scouts give you that range where if they're in the mod it's 2 kilometers. If they're within 2 kilometers of an enemy unit, they will provide that corrected shot bonus to artillery. So they're very nice to have. I also like to use them because I use them for screening my main forces, even my other infantry. So I forgot to mention it. Again, like I said, I'm going to forget shit because there's a lot of shit. But I forgot to mention it, but squads in this game, infantry squads, their concealment and their speed is scaled proportionately by their size. So this is a 4-man team. These are 9-man teams, squads. You see how it's lower optics. Well, the stealth isn't going to change a whole lot because the threshold between very good and exceptional is very wide. But this unit has quite a bit better stealth and optics than this unit. I should say, well, it does have better optics, but because of its size, it has better stealth and better speed than the full-size squad. So it allows you to use smaller squads a little bit better as screening forces. You want to use your small squads to screen, generate contact with the enemy, keep him felt out, know where he's at, and then keep the enemy sight and guns off of your big squads and bring them into play when you're ready to suppress and crush, assault and crush an enemy unit. So we'll go with that recon infantry. The Folk guys are also really good with the GSR, but I don't really like their lower card size. This is, again, one of those things I might come back and I might grab if I got extra points, but this is sort of my bare minimum for recon for this deck. So anti-air tab, not a lot of options, but but what we have here is very good. The Stinger is a pretty competitive man pad, and just because it's got low damage and low range doesn't mean you should thumb your nose up at it. Man pads, again, because they're infantry, they can, and they're very small squads, 2-man squads. These guys are really the ones you can get closest to the front lines with without them being detected. Typically, when my man pads get engaged and destroyed, it's because they actually physically see where the missile was shot from and they like drop a glide bomb, like a precision munition on it. So typically, man pads don't take a lot of casualties, so I always like to take man pads. PVADs, this is the radar one. As you see here, it's got a low radar detection value for against air targets. It's got some different munition types for engaging air targets, as well as the radar icon. This allows it, all radar in the mod, all radar gun weapons can actually engage projectiles, engage and intercept projectiles. Not all projectiles, but things like glide bombs and air-to-the-ground missiles. So you're not going to hit all of them with it. It's not a 100% chance you're going to do an interception with this thing. It's going to depend on the speed of the missile, the direction it's coming from, et cetera, et cetera. But you can do interceptions with this, so I do like to have it. On the flip side, because it is a radar weapon, there's a chance that it can get hit by an anti-radiation missile. But here's another thing. Mod mechanic alert. The concealment of radar weapons is actually scaled by their power. So in general, unfortunately, there's not really a way that shows you. Actually, yes, there is. I do have these icons. It kind of gives you an idea of the radar power. Now these are obviously like concealment and optics and stealth. These are thresholds. The higher the radar power, the more likely it's going to be spotted by an anti-radiation, like a CAD or EW unit. So let's say the enemy rolls out a CAD plane, and I have a PVADs sitting beside my IHawk. They're going to spot my IHawk first, and they're going to shoot it first. So what I can do is I can put that PVADs in front of the IHawk, and hopefully they'll be spotted about the same time, if not the PVAD seen first, but spotted about the same time. When the IHawk does get engaged, either the PVAD gets engaged, or if the IHawk gets engaged, I can intercept the CAD missile or the light bomb, whatever they're using to destroy that IHawk. So PVADs are more of the fodder. IHawks sort of like the MLRS and the 203mm artillery. This is more my high-level strategic asset. Obviously, you can see by the range, you can shoot across the map. So this is what I want to have. I want to have this. This is my queen piece. So that's 3 basic assets that are really good. This is sort of like the minimum that I consider. Flak, manpad, radar. However, we got the Chaparral in this deck. Chaparral is an absolutely godly Farmer Shorad in this mod. It's just got good accuracy, really good range for Shorad. Can't, obviously, as a infrared missile, homing missile, it can't be targeted by seed. This is an awesome piece to have. I will definitely be taking one of these. And lastly, if I have it, so these use the same model as IHawk, but these are basically IHawk decoys. They're much cheaper and they come in a larger card, but they don't do anything. They basically only exist to be targeted, spotted and targeted by enemy seed systems. However, they exhibit the same threat level. They give off essentially the same signature, quotation marks, as the iHawk. So if I put one of these in front of my iHawk and the enemy spots it, there's a decent chance they'll target this first over my regular iHawk. So these are kind of nice to have. However, I would not consider them to be essential. If you got a plane or something you want to use over that, that might be a consideration. Helicopters, not a whole lot of choices here. However, we do got some good assets. We got the Tow Cobra, which is kind of your all-rounder. We got the AH-1S with the rockets and the grenade launcher. This is really better for anti-personnel work. And then we got the Heavy Hog with the Zunies. The Zunies, obviously, like things go, you're going to get more DPS, more damage out of the Hydra 70s. However, the Zunies have better range and accuracy. Most situations, the Zunies are going to have more utility. It's hard to get those helicopters close to the front line without them getting popped by man-pads. The Zuni gives me the ability to loft rockets on the people without them being able to touch them with most SHORAD. In order to touch this thing, they have to fly out a plane, and then that gets in the whole whether or not they got air superiority and air denial and everything. So I'm definitely going to take some Heavy Hogs. I'm definitely going to take a Tow Cobra. Generally always want to have a helicopter. I don't care if you don't fucking like helicopters or if you think they get shot down all the damn time. You will need this thing if the enemy has deployed either backline. There's false flag forces. This mod, false flag troops can deploy anywhere on the map. So there's a potentially an insider threat. Not many decks have them, and they're not high. There's not a lot of them, but they're out there. So I like to have Tow Cobra. I like to have stuff like this for countering both backline guys, but also enemy armored pushes. Let's say you start a game, the enemy just decides to throw everything in the freaking tanks and just bowl down a freaking highway. You've got like one tow missile set up because you spread out all over the map. You're trying to hold down every road with a freaking tow missile and a machine gun, and they're just punching right through you at the beginning of the game with a dozen tanks. This is how you stop it. Just fly that bad boy up and just start popping tanks. The deeper they go into your line, the better work you can do with this. So, not all decks have helicopters, but I like to have, if my deck has helicopters, I will definitely take them. Air units. Okay, so air units, we don't have a huge diversity. This is not an air dom deck. This is more reposing on artillery superiority and air denial, as you can see by the iHawk and the MLRS. However, we do have some good air assets. Chiefly, I would probably say would be as I would so lovingly call it, the F-16 Spam Ram. I guess I got to go on a spiel about air combat in this game too, or in this mod, I should say. So air combat is slightly different from vanilla in some ways. Some of the base mechanics obviously still exist. However, there's some big considerations. Number one, everything's longer range. But number two, aircraft actually have varying levels of concealment and spotting. Their spotting range is based off of roughly a conversion calculation from their real-life radar range. And their concealment, the same with radar cross-section. The F-16 is one of the best radar cross-sections of all fighters in the game. It's only outperformed, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, by the Freedom Fighter. The F-16 is fast. It's got pretty damn good agility for its speed. And on top of that, it's got great concealment. And in general, it just has a great armament. Just AMRAAMs, AIM-9s, the AIM-9Ms with the longer range than the Ls. It's just a good freaking plane. Pack players just really have a rough time with the F-16. It can thread in there. It can fly into fairly restricted airspace and still do work. So I like to always take something that's got some long-range missiles. Maybe I'll come back and get something with short-range missiles. The AIM-9s, as you can see, they got a little bit of an advantage over the AMRAAMs in terms of close-range accuracy. But that's about it. The the AMRAAMs are generally better. I guess the AIM-9s, they cost less supply, so you could theoretically cycle this plane a little bit faster. But in general, AMRAAM is going to be superior for anti-air work. Also, having 2 slots of AMRAAMs is freaking godly. That's really nice to have. AT plane, that's really nice to have too, but it's expensive as hell. But this thing can lock on to ground vehicle units and launch fire and forget Hellfires at them. So, or did I say Hellfire? I'm losing my mind. Anyway, the Mavericks. Bombers, you generally always want to get bombers. Like I said, supply consideration is honestly my biggest consideration with bombers. What is it dropping versus what is the supply value? I like to always have something that carpets, but also something for engaging precision if possible. However, if I had to pick one or the other, I'd probably pick the precision option over the carpet option, especially if it's HE. However, since the precision option is looking like the cluster in this deck, I might actually just go with the HE. I'll definitely go with the HE. We'll think about the cluster here. A10's also got an HE option, and it actually carries more bombs, but it freaking sucks as a bomber. It's just, it's got good agility, so it can turn on a dime, but the problem is it doesn't move fast. Not a fan of using the A10s for anything other than for their guns and rockets, to be honest. And I've already got a A10 with rockets over here, so I'm probably not going to worry about these. I might take the AT plane. We'll take the AT plane. Napalm, I forgot to explain Napalm. Napalm's got a much reduced area. It's like cluster. It's got a much reduced area of effect over high explosive. However, obviously it doesn't have near anywhere the same critical damage. This is really more of an area denial weapon. In the mod, incendiary flames burn for much longer, and they can spread. If you drop these incendiary bombs on a field, particularly tree line or something, it's going to go up in flames, and it's going to be unusable by the enemy for some time, like 5, 10, 15 minutes. So really, this is more of an air denial asset. Whether I take this, it's honestly more map dependent than anything else. So let's see. Oh, looks like we are at 32 activation points. So yeah, let's review. I think I've got everything I want. I may give up the decoy for something else, but we'll see. Yeah, the infantry, it doesn't look like I have a lot of infantry. I know a lot of players prefer to use way more infantry than I do. However, I don't tend to lose them all that much. I tend to do my suppressing with my artillery, and I really just need my infantry to come in and just make that final close with and destroy maneuver. But yeah, that's going to be my deck, I think. This deck, obviously, it's very, very heavily contingent on using air denial. In previous iterations of the mod, if you played before, like 6 months ago, or 8 months ago, or a year ago, air denial was more of a viable strat over air superiority. I ended up modifying missiles so that they go their correct velocity. As it turns out, the displayed velocity in the ammunition files was not correct. I had to go into the missile descriptors and change it there. So if you played the mod a long time ago and you're just coming back to it, you will find that while these weapons are long range and they make a big bang, the missiles are much slower, so planes can actually avoid them. Especially, let's say if my Hawk shoots at an enemy plane, right when my Hawk launches, that enemy plane goes to evac. That evac plane is going to go into a dive. They dive in the mod when they evac. So he's going to go into a dive, and he's going to zoom out of there. And if your radar battery is at long range and he's firing while that enemy's plane's ass is to your radar battery and he's leaving, there's a decent chance you're not going to catch him with your missile. All missiles do go faster than the planes. It does look like it. It doesn't look like it sometimes, but they can catch the planes. It's just that the plane is at long range and moving away, you're just not going to catch it in time. Let's say something else about radar, and the reason why, or the long-range missile batteries and such, and why I also echelon my anti-air, is that the rotation, I also change traverse speeds. So the mod has realistic traverse speeds on everything, whether it's a tank turret or the artillery gun or the missile system. It can't snap on a dime anymore in a millisecond and engage a target. It has to rotate to the target first before it can go through its aiming sequence and then fire. So as you might can understand, the IHawk is going to have a much more difficult ability to engage close proximity targets. It can do it. It can hit it. It's going to have a decent chance to hit a close target, but its ability to engage is going to be much lower, as it's got to rotate to that target first. So you can't just take these IHawks and put them on your front line. Number one, they're going to get swatted by SEAD and EW really quick and destroyed. Number two, they're not going to be able to rotate fast enough. So you have to have Stingers, PVADs, Shaps in front of these frickin' IHawks to screen them. And in return, IHawks cover these guys from things like glide bombers and other precision weapon planes, the AT planes. I've got some AT planes. It says AT because it's a vanilla convention, but I've got some that are also like HE and bunker busters and stuff. So you have to protect your guys from precision munitions. But yeah, this will probably be my deck. I got my spam ram. That is to say, another thing I forgot to mention, because air defense, ground air defense has been throttled the way it has been. Air defense has been shifted more into the hands of fighters, which is how it should be in real life. Your number one air defense for your fighters, because that's a highly mobile asset that can close and disengage, as opposed to a more static radar that's on the ground. So this spam ram is a very powerful asset for me. If I had another card, I might take the ones with the shorter missiles, but I'm fairly satisfied with the setup. So we'll name it 8th Infantry Division Steps. Do that. I already got an 8th Infantry deck, so I'll make sure I don't over. But yeah, anyway, thank you for joining me, and I'll probably do another video on deployments. We'll do a deployment video with this deck, kind of give you an idea of like what my thought process is when I deploy, and because really I do the same thing. I do the same thing in most games. There's a way you look at the map and you interpret the map, and I just go on autopilot. You do the same thing every deployment. It's not that hard. You just got to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So anyway, thanks for sitting through this video and all my uhs and ums and southern accent. And hopefully I'll see you in the Discord or something playing some multiplayer with us, because that'd be totally badass. Anyway, thanks for playing.